All right, folks, to our third speaker. If I could please welcome Miss Phyllis Mureu to the stage. Phyllis is the executive director of Windle International, Kenya and Somalia. And it's actually 8 o'clock in the evening, and Miss Phyllis is joining us from Nairobi, Kenya. Um, Phyllis would like to focus on the work in providing education to refugees and providing different pathways to education, one of which is the international option and also the internationally recognized certification. Phyllis has a wealth of experience in education and emergencies in both Kenya and Somalia, and she's been in the field for the last 15 years. Miss Phyllis, over to you with respect to your presentation.
Thank you, Sinan. Thank you very much once again, Sinan, for the introduction. And also thank you to Sheridan College for giving me this opportunity to share our experience in supporting education for the displaced persons. Just for the sake of the audience to know that Windle International Kenya has been in operation for the last 40 years. And within that period, we've also been supporting education for refugees. We've been working closely with WURS, and I'm happy that Kat is part of the panel. We've been working closely with UNHCR. We have Mike on board. And of course, from the picture actually you have on my first page is the project that we do together with York University. And Hayun will be talking more about that in her presentation. Next slide, please. Thank you. As mentioned by Micah in his presentation, that one of the challenges that the youth face in the camps is the limited education opportunities, especially at the higher level. From Michael's presentation, you could see that the bulk of the support is at the primary level, where the students are at 68%, and secondary school at 34%, but at tertiary level was only 5%. So you can see there's a big disparity between the students who graduate from high school and those who end up support getting onto university. In Kenya, we have two camps, the Dadaab and the Kakuma refugee camps, and they host the populations that come from the conflict areas, but the majority of them come from Somalia and South Sudan. But we do also have other communities from DRC, from Uganda, Burundi, and Ethiopia. But the bulk of the population is from Somalia and South Sudan. Of course, part of the challenge that we face in providing education is a high enrollment of overage learners who are not able to continue with their education because of conflict. And this makes it also difficult for them also to move from one level to the next. And that is also a group that we have to support to ensure that they do not drop out, and also increase the number of them that get into the higher education. And when Catherine was talking, she mentioned about tertiary education opportunities. And one of the things that we also experience is the limited opportunities that are there. One, because of financing, it's very expensive to support university education. And that also means that the scholarships that are available also limited, and they're very competitive. For example, the scholarship that we support through WOSC, the Student Refugee Program, that scholarship is very popular among the refugees in Kenya. But unfortunately, we only get about 55 slots per year. And sometimes you have about 1,500 students competing for those slots. So the competition is very high. Through UNHCR, we also get additional slots for opportunities for students to pursue their degree courses in Kenya. But again, compared to the number of slots available and the students applying, the numbers are always limited. Then we do have the other challenge. Sometimes some of the refugees come into the country and they have done their high school in their home country. But then for them to access education in any of the Kenyan institutions, they have to ensure that the certificates they have are acceptable by the Ministry of Education. And sometimes that does not work well, and they may have to repeat some units in order for them to access a higher education. That means instead of going forward, you have to go backwards in order for you to move. Then the other challenge, and Kat mentioned it, the number of girls who transition from each level keeps going down. At the beginning, normally at the primary level, the ratio is almost 50-50. As they go into secondary school, the numbers drop. And then at university level, it really drops. So those are some of the challenges that we also see as we try to provide university education. Next slide, please. Why do we provide education in our intervention? As an organization, we strongly believe that education transforms society. And when we look at the population that we serve, we believe that the only thing that the refugees are able to take away from the camps, especially in the context of Kenya, it's only education. That's the only thing that no matter what happens, once they have learned, once they have acquired that skill, it can't be taken away. And that is what can help them access the options that are there. We talk about opportunities that exist in third country or opportunities that exist also within the country, but they can only take advantage of those opportunities if they are educated and they have the skills that they require. There's support that we provide to the refugees. We don't only just do it in our programs in Kenya, but we also do the same in the other countries where we are intervening in education. We are doing this in Uganda, Sudan, South Sudan, and more recently in Somalia. Next slide, please. As we support the students in higher education, we are also very aware of the needs and the changes that happen in the 21st century. And we try to look at what is the nature of our population. One of the things that we accept about the population that we serve is that they're very mobile. And this is because either they have conflicts that are man-made in their countries, or what we are dealing with at the moment in Kenya, drought, which is making people move from Somalia into Kenya and from South Sudan into Kenya. So that means you get more people coming into the refugee camps, not only because of conflict, but because of also of other natural phenomena. We also are aware that sometimes there is competing priorities between earning a living and acquiring skills. So sometimes we have to ensure that the kind of education we provide is flexible enough to be able to accommodate those unique requirements of our population. Then we also do work towards making sure that as much as possible that we are supporting both boys and girls, because we do realize that development can only be sustainable if it benefits both men and women. So higher education opportunities which are able to accommodate both genders and provide same opportunities, always a good option for us. Also, we look at how do we provide this education. And with COVID, we have seen, and Michael mentioned, that students have lost a lot of their school time because of the COVID, and the schools had to be closed down. So we are looking at what are the opportunities that are there that enable the students who come from the refugee communities, that they are able to continue with their education without being interrupted. But even when those interruptions happen, that they are not disadvantaged. We have seen through COVID, the people who are already marginalized because of other situations like drought, conflict, and so on, were further marginalized because of technology. In most of the camps where we work, internet connectivity is not very stable. In some areas is not even available. So that means the students who needed to access their classes using technology, they were not able to do that, and that put them at a more disadvantage. Next slide, please. Next slide. Sorry, the previous one, this one. Thank you. So through the partnerships with the different universities, we are able to support the students. And currently we have 9 different tertiary scholarships that we are supporting in Kenya, Sudan, South Sudan, Uganda, and Somalia. And we do this through the different partnerships that we have created over the years. The beauty with these partnerships, we have them in country and also outside the country, and that we are able to provide solutions to the students depending on what they're eligible to take advantage of. Next slide, please. Thank you. So as part of our intervention and in order to increase access to university education, and I have alluded to it before, the partnerships with the in-country university helps us to have more students access higher education because not everybody will be able to get a scholarship outside the country. So if we can get as many as possible students into the universities in country, then that means that we have more students who graduate from high school accessing higher education. Then we have partnerships with universities outside the country, and through this we work in close collaboration with WUSC under the SRP program. I mentioned it before. We get 55 slots every year from the SRP program, and that means that the students have an opportunity to access education outside of Kenya. As I mentioned before, financing for higher education is a challenge, and we have found that also using blended models as part of delivering education is another way of increasing the number of students who access higher education. My colleague Hayun will be talking more about the BHER model that we are currently running in the Dadaab refugee camp, and she will explain how that has helped to increase the number of teachers in the Dadaab refugee camp. Then we also use the on-job training, and we have a model, quality secondary education. And this, we work again with universities to provide ongoing training, and especially for the refugee teachers. One of the challenges that we have seen before is that as much as we would like to have more students transition to university, if they are not doing very well in their high school, then we will not have the numbers that we need. And sometimes that part of their success is pegged on how well prepared or what type of teacher that they have in class. And one way of ensuring that we are increasing those numbers is also ensuring that our teachers are well trained. Next slide, please. We've seen a number of benefits in using the different models to deal with the challenges of university education access for the refugees. One of the benefits is through the partnerships that we have with the universities and doing a lot of advocacy, we get this refugee student admitted into the in-country institution on the same entry behavior as the national students. They are not required to have special entry behavior, neither are they required to do an additional course in order to access the university education, but they are given the same opportunity as the nationals, so long as they meet the minimum grade like everybody else. We also have the opportunity to send the students to third countries like Canada, as I mentioned before, and we do also have some partnerships with universities in UK, especially for the postgraduate level of education. As I mentioned, regarding the limited resources that are available for higher education, the blended models have really helped in increasing the number of refugees who are accessing the university education. And at the same time, they are cost effective, but they also help us to increase the number of female students who access education, because in some cases, some families don't want their daughters to go away from home, and using the blended models, that has helped to increase the number of the female students. Then of course, the other benefit is having teachers who are trained, and that means that we have more teachers who are in the schools drawn from the refugee community. And the beauty with that is if they already are skilled teachers and already working in the schools, it means that even when they move back home or if they transition to a third country, those skills are still relevant and they can be of use. And of course, in with some universities, they have been able to provide subsidized tuition fees for the refugees, making it easier for us to put more refugees into school. Next slide, please. What are some of the opportunities that still exist out there for us to be able to provide more students with access to university education? One is maybe doing more advocacy with the host governments to consider student loans schemes for refugees. I know, for example, in Kenya and Uganda, the government provides student loan schemes for their national students, but they do not do that to the refugee students. So that's part of our advocacy to see whether that can be done. The other one is to work closely with the private sector, to provide internship opportunities for the refugees, to give them an experience. What is it that the market requires? What does the industry require? What is it that they need to have in place so that when they do actually get into the industry, they're prepared for it? In terms of additional support for the female students, especially the ones who are young mothers, providing them with additional stipend to be able to support their children so that they are able to continue being in school and they don't have to drop out. And of course, there are those students who have gone through the cycle of higher education and they have acquired skills that can be of use. And this is one area that is good because it gives them an opportunity to give back to the society and also back to the same communities that they came from, and also to the current student through opportunities such as career development and counseling sessions. Next slide, please. And I say once again, thank you, Senad, and thank you very much, Sheridan College. We made this opportunity to be part of the webinar. Thank you.
I think the thank you goes to you and to Windle for all the amazing work that you're doing on the ground. And I know I have some questions in light of some of the recent announcements about the camps in Kenya that we'll hold for the Q&A section. I think it's so amazing that our speakers and our organizations are so interrelated and working towards the same cause. So just a thank you to you, and I look forward to seeing you shortly in our question and answer period. At this point, folks, I think we're going to be bringing our speakers to the stage to open up a question and answer period. There was one specific question for Ms. Phyllis after her presentation that I'd like to start with. And the question and comment is in relation to, first of all, great presentation, but a question in relation to if you are working with colleges and technology institutes in Kenya who have partnerships with institutions in Canada, and making the comment and observation that applied education and training, like what is offered at Sheridan and Camosun colleges, seems to be very relevant to refugee needs. So Phyllis, did you want to kindly speak to that, please?
Thank you, Sanad. Yes, just to confirm, yes, we have partnership with many of the universities that work with other institutions like Mastercard. I'm aware, for example, at the moment, Mastercard is working closely with universities like USIU, Kenyatta University, Nairobi University, and those are the places where we have our students. So it helps to have those partnerships in place, because when they do advertise for the scholarships, then we are able to lobby and ask, can we also have additional scholarships for the refugee students from Kakuma or Dadaab? Thank you.
Great. Another question is in reference to comments and closing comments that Hayun made, and that was meaningful and sustainable changes take time, as echoed by the York-U partnership. What lessons, and this is open to everyone, what lessons can be drawn for funding models that have 12 and 18-month periods in this space?
I have some thoughts. I think, Jane, Hayun, you raise a really critical point, and something that, of course, all of us really struggle with. I think the unique funding model for the student refugee program is a critical factor for its success. So the whole of institution approach, the contributions that come from across the institution, whether that be students, the institution itself, community members, other fundraising modalities. I think that has been absolutely essential for the success of the program, and for the program to have 40 years through all sorts of changes, through a pandemic, through political dynamics, you name it. I think what I was reflecting on listening to each of the presentations and this conversation, I think, Sheridan, you guys have curated such a perfect panel, a real snapshot and a case study of a context where Canadian organizations, Canadian institutions that are connected to Kenyan institutions have really engaged in an ecosystem and an education system in really interesting ways, and in ways that build upon each other's work. And that has happened, I think, both organically and intentionally. I've been with WUSC for 14 years, and certainly we've been partnering with Windle for 30 years. And some of the work that WUSC and Windle do together on primary and secondary education in Dadaab is part of why, Hayun, I think you're seeing more women get into your program as they mature. But part of the work that the BEAR program is doing in training educators is feeding back into the success of that program, that very program that WUSC and Windle are running at lower levels. And so we can see these different connections across our initiatives, and they, don't always come together in the ways that we would like to, because we're all working on this sort of the way in which the humanitarian response system is funded on these short-term agreements. But there is this concerted effort, I think, that we are all making to build on top of each other's work, to coordinate across. So I think, Jane, the question you asked is a real challenge, and is, I think, a structural barrier to taking this work further faster. But I would say, that there are ways to kind of really lean into that tension and really manage it.
Thanks, Kat. I'm going to turn it over to Phyllis just with respect to just comments on short-term funding, then over to Michael, please.
Thank you, Sinan. I just wanted to mention that sometimes the short-term funding for maybe 12 months or 18 months is also an opportunity for some of the refugees who have part funding from other sources, but they don't have the full funding. So if they get another person who is willing to meet them halfway, it ensures that then they are able to remain in school for the full term. So it doesn't go to waste. If it's structured properly, it does help meet the gap that we see. Thank you.
I just wanted to offer just some other reflections and maybe some contradictions around funding and such. I mean, we're working in an environment where, like for UNHCR, we're not by any means suggesting we provide the totality of services for refugees, when there are many other UN agencies, NGO partners, and such that play critical roles and provide critical services to refugees. That being said, our budget's $9 billion a year globally, and I never imagined when I started with UNHCR in 2002. I remember my boss at the time said, "We'll never go above $1 billion," and we're at $9 billion in terms, and that's based on need. That's not what we get. That's what the need is, right? We have gotten to $5 billion, which is amazing in terms of statistics. But what it means is that some things don't get funded, and we work in an annual planning cycle. We're moving now to a more multi-year planning cycle. But the concept is for UNHCR, you deal with emergencies, you deal with humanitarian assistance. This concept that refugees just arrive. Yet you've talked. Look, if you listen to Hayun, the presentations, you talk about the Dadaab camp. That camp has been there since the 90s, the early 90s, right? And if you depend on which academic you talk to today, if a refugee becomes a refugee tomorrow, they may be a refugee for the next 18 to 20 plus years. Yet the cycle we work on is sort of, okay, here's an emergency, get them the food, get them the latrines, get them, so there's some dysentery, get them some general protection assistance. And often things like education can be put off for a time until they sort of, we'll see how this works out. Maybe they'll be able to go back, maybe we won't. And so education is really always one of these vulnerable funding areas, because you're always prioritizing the immediate problems of whatever assistance. Whenever there's a gap, do we continue to that program for secondary school education for girls, for example, right? So it's a constant challenge, and it's constantly on the edge in terms of an area that, which is vital to the life and well-being of all people and of young people. Yet, because of funding and funding models and these contradictions, oftentimes it's really in a, overusing the word, vulnerable situation. Pardon me.
Thank you, Michael. I can't help but bring up some of the announcements in relation to some of the camps and potential closures in Kenya. I'd like to open that up to folks with respect to any comment, because that could possibly further displace or cause. And I know that your organizations are currently still digging through this, but I'm just curious about some preliminary comments with respect to some of the announcements.
Michael, do you want to say something from UNITAIR perspective, or should I?
Well, maybe you're on the ground, and I'll say something first. So please go ahead.
Okay. All right. So in the Kenyan context, at the moment, we do have the call from the government to close the Dadaab and Kakuma camps, and we have a timeline until June 2022. But what has happened is that the government and UNHCR are working on a pathway that they have agreed upon, and there were 6 activities that needed to be done for that to happen. So I don't want to say the camps will not close, but I would like to say that those activities are still ongoing. They are not yet completed. So as it stands, maybe the camps are not going to close as soon as tomorrow, because there's a lot of work to be done. One of the activities that needs to be done is, as you know, the camps really are placed in areas where the populations are marginalized. So you will find there are people who lived in those areas before the refugees moved in. And when the refugees came and they saw the kind of support that was being provided, then they registered as refugees. So we do need to identify the population we're dealing with, whether who is the refugee and who is the Kenyan. So that process needs to be completed even before we can decide, do we close the camp? Because if we do the identification of who is who, we might maybe end up saying, okay, we have 100% Kenyan, so the camps remain, but then they become the responsibility of the Kenyan government, or the reverse happens, and we discover everybody who is there is a refugee. Then what do we do with that population? Yeah, thank you.
Just thank you, Phyllis. And Phyllis is on the ground, so she would know more about how this issue and this agreement is developing. I think I just wanted to make just a couple of reflections. First, we're grateful to the government of Kenya. As I mentioned earlier, they've been hosting refugees for decades and have been waiting for a plan in terms of what is the solution, what is it. And the reality with refugee work, UNHCR works on refugees, but we don't solve the political problems that create them. It's up to the international community to do that. And so the ongoing conflicts, and this is one of the problems we have, where the international community is it has let so many conflicts fester and continue to allow for displacement over so many years, that that is the root of the problem, right? And I don't want to suggest by any means it's easy. It is a challenge, but until those problems are solved, refugees aren't able to return in safety and dignity, which is what we'd ideally be working towards. But that being said, I also want to acknowledge, yes, there's a pathway, and again, obviously we're concerned about refugees aren't effectively in any context dumped across borders, because that's not a solution. That only leads to them going to some other place and such, and we don't want to create a humanitarian crisis. But at the same time, these various states in the global south, which host the majority of the world's refugees, to be fair, they host the majority of the most displaced, see the examples of Western countries and their externalization of protection, the barriers that they're putting up to protection. And the questions come up because they're at those meetings, they see what's happening. So why are we having to do this when the Western states aren't providing effective protection and such? Or I shouldn't say effective protection. But again, when they see bad examples in other states, this can exacerbate some of these problems.
Can I just add very briefly to what Phyllis and Michael said? I don't want to comment on the specifics of the situation in Kenya, but I do want to say, kind of building off your point, Michael, and what you said, Hayun, in your presentation about portability of education, and that being a worthwhile investment, no matter what the solution is, if it's a voluntary repatriation, if it's a resettlement to a third country, if it's integrating to a local context, education is going to be a very, very smart investment no matter what. And so I think that's something that I always take away in these broader contexts where there's a lot of political complexity and uncertainty. I think we can be assured of the value of the investment in education.
Thanks, Kat. Hayun, over to you for comment, and then I have one last question for everyone.
Yeah, I think just building off of what Kat just shared, most of the students currently enrolled in BEAR in Dadaab are Somali, and I think that Dadaab's proximity to the Somali border makes it a little bit of a unique context where the border is quite porous and people will move back and forth. But the thing that I want to add is listening to our students and just the aspirations they have for the future is they want to return. And the Kenyan government, ideally, we want to see a peaceful Northeast region where people are living safely and able to access all the things that they need. But again, just to, the students who grew up in the camps, they one day envision a peaceful Somalia and they want to return. And we found that a lot of our graduates, once they're armed, with an accredited university degree, they're able to go back and find opportunities in civil society, in international NGOs, but only with the credentials that they have are they able to facilitate for themselves a meaningful return. And there are voluntary repatriation programs, I think, through the UNHCR, but just anecdotally from what I've seen, when graduates are able to secure the credentials they need to do the work that they want to do, which is rebuild their homeland, is they're able to return in a more sustainable way. So I'm just echoing Kat in that, education, higher education in light of one of the durable solutions, I think, is key, and it is an investment, and I think it will compound, and it's so I hope that funders will able to see the value in that just going forward.
Thanks, Hayun. And just noting that we have the last few minutes here, folks, I just don't want to rush through the thank you. The thank you to the four of you for your time today to supporting Sheridan's International Education Week, and specifically this webinar. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I think what's been demonstrated here is the collaborative approach that all of your organizations are taking to address the same crisis. And with that, I think it's a natural tee up to a call to action. So in the final minute, if we could go around, final 2 minutes here, to just get a quick point. What a call to action, regardless if it is our institutions on the call, whether it is possible volunteers, students, faculty, staff. What can we do? What is one thing we can do to support? And I open that to anyone who has comment. Michael?
No, continue to support the student refugee program. Colleges are a bit the way forward. We could see for expanding access to education and tertiary education in Canada as a pathway. The students who come through the program are some of the best ambassadors of this cause and such. And I would say, listen to them. They've got great ideas. Every one of them. I sometimes get into these discussions where people say, "Oh, you're robbing the intelligentsia, the intellectuals." The future intellectuals of these various refugee populations. No, not a single one. Every one of them that comes over here gets an education, wants to assist their family members, wants to assist their communities back in the countries of asylum, back in the countries of origin. So it's the cascading effect of education and this opportunity that colleges can provide is immense.
Can I just echo that to say, if you're a student joining your local SRP community is a great way to get involved for all the reasons that Michael just shared. I think that in the context of our graduate program, if there are people who are looking to write, we have a roster of graduate students in Dadaab who are eager to collaborate, to participate in research projects, to speak. So, that's one way academics can reach out. But I'm assuming that a lot of the people on the call are from Toronto, and I think the SRP program is a great way to get involved.
Ms. Phyllis or Kat, any closing comments?
Yes, I just have a final one, just to emphasize that for many of, when we do have the cross-border meetings and we have populations of, let's say, from Somalia coming into Kenya for a meeting, and they are asked what is the most important thing that they want done in their country, they always say education, and it always comes at the top. So there is no way we can get away from it. As much as we have other priorities, they rate education as the first priority for them. And that's why maybe to some extent the refugee camps continue to exist, because if the education system is not stable in their own countries, then they remain to ensure that their children access education. Thank you.
Ms. Kat, final comment?
Okay, I will end on a slightly more fun note because it's lunchtime, it's dessert time maybe. So my call to action is to eat chocolate. And by eating chocolate, you can support the student refugee program, not only at Sheridan and in the GTA, but across the country. So we have a really special partnership with Peace by Chocolate, which is a refugee-founded business on the East Coast. And if you buy some chocolate for yourself, for your family members for the holidays, $1 from every chocolate bar goes to support the program. So that's my call to action, amongst all of the other excellent calls to action that my co-panelists made.
On that note, I would just like to again thank the four of you for the time, your expertise, your experience in providing to us again. Thank you so much. And I'm going to eat some chocolate now. Have a great day.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Suman.
Thank you, Suman.
Bye.